This next guest is a good friend of the show. He makes us laugh in the Chargers Media Center and on road games. I'm talking about our compa, Dylan Hernandez, the great columnist for the LA Times. How are you doing, Dylan? And tell the listeners how much fun you had with us in Washington, D.C., where you found your good friend, Bolt God.
Oh, that's right, man. God, that feels like 2 years ago, doesn't it? Yeah. So on the flight to DC, I happened to be sitting next to this dude that he was carrying around like a what does he wear? Like, is it a mask or something? Like
It's
whatever
a
he
get up
had,
from
he was
yeah,
carrying.
it's like a get up from like a either a video game or a movie. I
Oh, it was
really
the
am
hat.
not
It was the
familiar with it.
hat. It's the hat that he
Yeah,
wears,
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So he was carrying his hat, and so I'm like, hey, like, so you're traveling for the game, whatever. It turns out he is Bolt God, who's obviously, I guess, among Charger fans, like a well-known super fan. And there was a meetup in DC of all places, in the Georgetown neighborhood, right? And we met up and we went over there. And I didn't know there were 200 Charger fans in Los Angeles. And there were 200 Charger fans in DC partying. So that was kind of an eye-opening experience there. It does show, that right, and LA, and that's kind of the thing with LA, right? It's so spread out that sometimes, a team can have actually a very solid following, but you kind of don't see them because everybody's scattered everywhere.
Yeah, Dylan, we like to have you on the show because we have many road trip stories to tell because you're a pretty outgoing guy, and from that trip, I remember we met up with you and Jeff Miller at some Mexican restaurant, and you're like, "Hey, you guys want to hang out with Bolt God?" I'm like, "The Charger super fan, Bolt God, the guy who's dressed in like Mortal Kombat."
There it
Yeah,
is,
I'm
Mortal
hanging out with Bolt
Kombat.
God right now. I'm like,
Bolt
"Hey,
God's
why
a really
not?"
good. And it turned out Bolt God was a really good guy.
He's awesome. He's
And
awesome.
Jeff Miller, I believe, what was the bet? They bet for that. Was it that game that they bet?
Yeah, that if
Right, so
Washington won, Jeff had to buy him a shot, and if the Chargers won, Jeff had to buy him a shot.
Right.
So and then he said, "If you don't buy me a shot, I'm going to put you in a headlock." So that was an extension of the bet.
Right. So has the debt been paid?
It has not.
Not
Okay,
that we
well,
know
then I
of.
guess I gotta go on the road to make sure. I gotta. I'm not okay with people watching on bets,
Exactly.
Yeah, we all got to be all four of us to see Jeff Miller. I guess what is he gonna pound? Tequila? I don't know what type of drink Jeff is. He's a marathon runner.
Yeah, he is. I'm not really sure. I remember at that Mexican place actually that where you guys met us, whatever. I actually ordered an entire what is it? Like a whole thing of tequila margarita, right? I got a whole pitcher.
Oh wow.
Thinking we were going to share, and Jeff was like, "No." So I guess somebody had to drink it.
No wonder you were a little more outgoing than usual that day. When
That was in a good mood.
But Dylan, we wanted to have you on the show to discuss your latest trip to Las Vegas. You were ringside to cover Canelo Alvarez against Canelo-Plant. So we wanted to ask you about that. I guess undisputed fight there, super middleweight, where Canelo took all the belts, but. Dylan, I think we spoke a little bit at a Chargers home game. I forget which game it was, but you were kind of thinking that Caleb has a good chance.
I did until and this is on the record, by the way, so you can go check to see, make sure I'm not lying here. But I started, so maybe about a week before the fight, I actually started watching Plant. Right? I mean, honestly, I don't follow boxing as I used to be one of those people, by the way, that watched everything. Right? Every ESPN show. Tuesday night fights on USA, everything I used to watch, and now I honestly watch very little. I'd seen kind of clips of Plant here and there, and just right, you look at like the type of fighter he is. He's a movement guy, he's a fast guy, and those are the kind of guys that have given Canelo trouble historically. So I thought like, oh, maybe this guy has a chance, especially because of the size. What I saw though, about a week kind of before the fight, I started watching some of his older fights, and you saw like the quality of competition just wasn't great, and he, because the thing with what speed allows you to do, right? Those fast guys, they always look like they're a step ahead, right? Mentally, and because they can't afford to be, right? Because they're physically so fast, it gives you more time, it's like a hitter, say with great bat speed, right? You can wait just a little bit more, and so Plant had those kind of qualities, but when you saw who he was doing it against, it started looking a little bit less convincing. One thing I didn't like, he has no right hand. I mean, he has a great left hand, or had a great left hand. But the other thing too, what I noticed is, there's a difference between boxing and running, right? Boxing to me is, yeah, you're moving a lot, but every now and then you stop, right, at the right opportunity, shift your weight from the back leg to the front leg and actually put something on the punch, and then you go back into moving, Now that obviously requires like a certain understanding of timing. Some guys, though, that you see, what I mean by running is they never kind of take the weight off the back foot, right? They're always in kind of position to retreat and never even put enough on the punch. And that's kind of one thing that I noticed about Plant was whenever he was retreating, he was like in full bore retreat. There was never this thing where he could kind of stop and kind of put something on the punch, because people talk about how, say, I mean, we're taking an extreme example here of somebody who was really good, but say Floyd Mayweather, right? You can talk about how Floyd had no power, especially as he moved up in weight, but the one thing he could do was he could hit you hard enough to stop your feet. And the one thing that you saw in this fight was Canelo's feet just never stopped, right? It didn't matter what this guy hit him with. He kind of looked, I actually thought like, and this is going to sound really, not great, but like he reminded me a little bit of Conor McGregor, honestly, the way he kind of threw that jab, right? There was just nothing on it. I mean, I think like if you had trained Conor McGregor, had trained as a boxer, say, for the last 10 years, that's probably how he would fight, and there was just really nothing on the punches right? And so Canelo just kind of kept coming in, whacking him. Now, where these fights get a little bit weird now is, just because of the state of the sport now, unfortunately, there's really, you're lucky if there are two good fighters in one division now, right? And so you have this guy in Canelo who started at 54, went to 60, is still kind of a smallish, if we're going to say it, right? He's 5'8". He's kind of a smallish middleweight, whatever, but he was fine there. And now, at 75, he's fighting guys that are like really tall now, right? And I'm really convinced that if this fight had been, if these guys were the same size, Canelo blows this guy out in 3 rounds. Because he was so big, he was able to kind of withstand the punishment. And, that's the thing is you kind of see, because I don't, you kind of look going forward from here. It's like, who does he fight next? And, Benavidez is kind of the obvious choice, right? David Benavidez, the 168-pound former champion who's kind of at 75, 68, whatever you want to call it. But that's like a really legitimate big guy, right? Now, that British guy that he fought, Callum Smith, was kind of a 6'3" kind of beanpole type guy. But you saw, Caleb-Plant was at least like physically, he kind of played the part, right? He had, broad shoulders. He looked like a much bigger fighter, and he was. And I do think that weight classes exist for a reason, right? And so, you kind of saw a little bit of Canelo maybe kind of hitting that physical ceiling there. And, honestly, like, again, like, I wouldn't blame him for not fighting Benavidez, because to me, that's almost like the Floyd Margarito thing, right? Floyd Mayweather never fought Margarito, and there was kind of like, well, why is he ducking him? Well, it's like, yeah, well, that's a really big welterweight. And Floyd was like a blown up, he was best at 130, I mean, as it is, he's already like fighting 15 pounds north of where he probably should have been anyway. And, again, like Pacquiao fought Margarito and he did win, but there was a price to be paid for that, right? And I think, Canelo, can he beat Benavidez? Of course, sure. But I think that there's going to be residual damage there where he has to kind of start thinking about it. And, so when I look at these fights now, they're all kind of weird, right? They're not fought at the right time, or the guys aren't the same size, or there's something kind of, because the disparity in skill level, I think it was very obvious from the beginning, right? One guy was a world-class fighter and the other guy wasn't. And, because of the size thing, he was allowed to kind of hang around for a while. But honestly, I don't know if you guys saw the fight, but to me, it started getting a little bit tedious, in the middle rounds, where it's like, okay, well, one guy's running, the other guy's just kind of running around. I think what I compared it to was, right, it was like a guy trying to cut down a redwood tree with like a steak knife, because of the size difference, and eventually, yeah, he did chop it down. And I do think it speaks to what a tremendous finisher, actually, right? Some of us were talking about this on Press Row. I mean, he might be the best finisher in boxing since maybe Tito Trinidad, right? Who, once he hurt you, would put you away. He does have that kind of finishing ability because of his discipline. He doesn't get too excited. He's an accurate puncher. He's got a lot on every punch. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of what it is right now.
There was a video, Dylan, kind of circulating during the fight where Caleb is kind of talking to Canelo during the fight, and he's like, "I'm good, right?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." Well, I like, you think I'm good? Like, you think I got something? Yeah, sure. And do you feel like Caleb was kind of just happy to be there in a sense? Like, It felt like kind of like that. And obviously, that first press conference, he obviously takes a swing at Canelo. Well, Canelo shoves him, he takes a swing at him and everything. But do you feel like that he was just happy to be there, happy to get that payday?
I don't, I mean, I think I think by that point in the fight he was, right? I do think he went into, because, and this is one thing that I wrote kind of going into the fight was, in boxing, cash cows, right, might as well be sacred cows, because it's a sport where, and this isn't literally true, but this is the impression, right, is that 99% of the money goes to 1% of the people. And so if there's a big draw, what you want to do is get a fight with that guy, right? So, and the last thing that you want to do is actually piss that guy off, because the way he can hurt you the most, his greatest form of retribution, is actually not to beat you up, but to not fight you and not give you that payday. And, we saw it with Canelo and Golovkin, right? In the second fight, Golovkin was talking a lot about how he flunked the drug test, whatever. And, even after 2 fights, I don't know what you guys thought. To me, both of them were pretty even. To me, that felt unresolved. Deserved a third fight. Canelo said no because, and I think it's because Golovkin brought up the drug issue. And, here too, I mean, we forget why this all really started. It was because Plant, right, when Oscar Valdez, who is in Canelo's camp, flunked a drug test, Plant shot off a tweet talking about how, hey, that whole camp is suspicious. And, if we're going to tell the truth, right, that's kind of that whispers around the sport, right? And so I think really that's what set Canelo off. And, you don't go there, right? I mean, because again, what if there was a close fight, right? Now he's not going to give you a rematch. There are consequences to this. There's a reason, right, with Floyd Mayweather, even after he went to jail and, was, right, pleaded guilty to beating up his ex-wife, no one brought that up. The only guy that ever brought it up was Robert Guerrero's father, right? And that's because, like, you don't want to piss off the cash cow. And so the fact that he did that, to me, was it showed me, like, this guy's putting his best, because his only way out now, he has to win, right? If he doesn't win, there's no rematch, whatever, he's going to get kind of pushed to the side. And so when he went there, to me, that showed that was, to me, Canelo-Plant pushing all in. And I really think that what this was about, again, was, Plant had been fighting, C and D level fighters. And all of a sudden, he didn't know what it was like to get into the ring with an A-level fighter. And, so, like, yeah, once he kind of got in there, now, once he started to talk, I do think there was a little bit of, right, there, it had, like, actually somewhat of, it wasn't like a hostile, like, trash talk type thing, right? There was actually kind of I think he was trying to, like, calm the guy down a little bit so that he wouldn't be as pissed, because by that point, I mean, he's getting whacked. Canelo, he figured it out. It was the left hook to the body and kind of that chopping right, to the temple. And it was just kind of a repeat of that over and over and over again, taking a lot of punishment at that point. So, yeah, I think he went into the fight with the intentions of winning. It's just that once you kind of got there, right, it's like a guy who's been facing 85-mile-an-hour pitching his whole life, and all of a sudden, right, steps in the batter's box against Aroldis Chapman, and it's like, oh, crap, right? What do I do here?
Yeah, Dylan, that's a good point of view to kind of sum up this fight. And you mentioned it earlier, it wasn't kind of the best Canelo performance, but he didn't need to be his best to beat Canelo-Plant. When you think about Canelo, you think about combinations, you think about counter punching. That's when Canelo's kind of at his best. You saw that with the Triple G fights there, both fights there. But I want to ask you, because I know you're kind of a tough critic when it comes to boxing skills. And when you talk about pound for pound, who's number one at the top right now, people always say Canelo Alvarez because of the signature victory. He has a nice resume. But for skill-wise, do you see Canelo as the best pound-for-pound fighter right now after what he's done in the last couple of years?
I mean, for a while, Terrence Crawford was my number one. Now he hasn't really fought anybody. That's a good point, right? I mean, he hasn't fought anybody. I don't think at this point is he a Hall of Famer? I would say no, actually, right? Because the resume is kind of thin. He just seems to be able to kind of do more things. Now, that said, I'm not sure. I don't have it in front of me here, but I think he's like 33 now. Yeah. And he's fought like once in like the last like 2 years, right? So that's the other thing here. I don't even know how good Terrence Crawford is anymore, right? I mean, word around, the boxing people was that he got touched, that he's been getting touched up and sparring and stuff. So we'll get a better idea, I think. Sean Porter, who's going to fight Crawford in, next week or the week after. He's a good, gateway type guy, right? In terms of, or, a gatekeeper type guy. in terms of he's going to make you fight. He's going to kind of test your heart. You're going to need to show like certain amount of skill to kind of get past that swarming style. So we'll see where Crawford is right now. But, even kind of going back to like Canelo's resume though, right? I mean, and not, look, I'll say before people accuse me of being like a Canelo hater or whatever, let me just say a couple things, right? One is that I have tremendous admiration for his professionalism in that like he's a guy who I think had like pretty serious flaws when he was a young fighter, even as a celebrated young fighter. He was very much a plotter. His footwork has gotten a lot better over the years. He has not kind of fallen into the trappings that a lot of other guys that, make a lot of money early, right? He's continually gotten better. He hasn't ducked people for the most part. To me, the Golovkin thing was kind of a half duck, right? He kind of waited until he got old to fight him, whatever. But look, he did wind up fighting him. So I have a lot of admiration for him. Now that said, I mean, if you combine, quality of opponent and kind of clarity of victory, what's his best win, right? Because to me, both of those Golovkin fights could have been scored either way. Now, like, I guess if I were to put up two fights that, this is who this guy is, I mean, those are probably the two fights, right? Which to me kind of shows, okay, yeah, so he was kind of even with an old Golovkin, but in terms of like kind of clarity of victory with quality of opposition, I mean, it might be like Danny Jacobs, right? I don't think he might have lost against Lara. That was kind of a close one. Trout, I had him winning, but not by much, right? Obviously he lost to Floyd. So yeah, you kind of look at those things and it's like, well, there are a lot of great names on it, but did he really, it's not like he really went down and just like cleaned everybody out either. This isn't, Manny Pacquiao, right? In the 2000s, whatever, where he's just kind of going out and just blowing out everybody. So yeah, it's tough right now, right? Because you have these guys, some of these guys have better, he clearly has the best resume. So I don't have any problem with somebody saying he's pound for pound number one. And then you have other guys like against, the Crawfords, the Spences. I mean, these guys they're not fighting, because we got to remember, man, even like just the economics of the sport have changed so much where, in the 90s, De La Hoya would fight 4 times a year, right? Twice on pay-per-view and twice on regular HBO, and you take like Canelo's fights in this last year, it's like, okay, well, you know what? Like, yeah, he unified the title, but of those 4 guys, probably the only real opponent he fought there was, Billy Joe Saunders. 20 years ago, is that a pay-per-view fight? I don't think so. That's, to me, that's like a regular Oscar fought Obakar, who was a really, really good welterweight on free HBO, and so, yeah, I don't know. It's everything's just kind of screwy right now. It's really hard for me to kind of say like this guy's better than that guy or,
Dylan, you make me sad for boxing. What a depressing state of boxing is right now.
Well, it is.
Guys are not fighting. Guys are a little older. But you're saying it right, though.
Yeah, and again, because here's the thing too. Because okay, let's look at Canelo, right? I mean, and I guess maybe why I personally have Crawford like kind of higher on the list is like when I think back, because now it's kind of hard again. Like it depends on which weight class you're in, right? And like who's there and whatever, right? And so. It's not like any of the weight classes are like that particularly deep or anything. I just kind of look at these fighters and I always kind of think like, okay, if you threw them in against anybody all time, like how competitive would they be? Right now, to me, Crawford is kind of a blown up lightweight. Like, he probably should be at 140 right now, right? He's an undersized welterweight. And I think like he would have, and that's the thing is I think he could have hung in with any 140 pounder, right? Like obviously like De La Hoya would have been just a tough matchup for him at 140 because of the size, whatever. But I don't think he gets embarrassed against anybody, right? He could have hung in there with even if it's Chavez, maybe Chavez might knock him out in the, 9th or 10th round, but he's going to kind of be competitive, whereas, if I look at Canelo, honestly, and again, let's go back to like kind of the middleweight, super middleweights of like the 90s. We're talking about guys like Roy Jones. Like he doesn't put a glove on Roy Jones. Right, Roy Jones wins every single round. James Toney was kind of an attack-minded, right, counter-punching, kind of actually has I think in terms of like fighting philosophy similar to what Canelo did, except he's just a lot better. He was a lot better. Go back and watch. James Toney was a tremendous athlete. Fast hands, like just the power, the skill. I mean, he was really fast. People forget, they think of that fat guy that was fighting, at heavyweight. But James Toney as a middleweight, super middleweight, was a monster, man. And right. And any time you see like a really fat athlete, by the way, still performing at a fairly elite level, it actually speaks to what a tremendous athlete that guy was, right? Bartolo Colon, incredible athlete, right? That guy used to be the fastest guy. Every team that he played on, he was the fastest guy until like he ballooned in weight. I mean, these are Juan Uribe, tremendous athlete. These guys are great athletes. So I don't think he beats Tony. Bernard Hopkins, younger Bernard Hopkins, was really fast. Canelo doesn't beat him. I don't think he beats Michael Nunn, who's like a name that I think has kind of been forgotten about. But Michael Nunn, if you remember, was like a round away from beating James Toney, right? He was defending his title against Toney, and it basically swept all the rounds, and Toney just like knocked him out at the end. If not, like we would be talking about, Michael Nunn being kind of this, and there's a guy that Roy Jones was very hesitant to fight. He was a tall southpaw. Again, I don't know I don't think Canelo touches him, honestly. I really don't. But the whole ecosystem is falling apart, if we're going to be honest, right? I mean, the way, when I was in college, I actually wanted to be a boxing writer, because that's where I felt like the most honest, like, writing was, right? It was very direct, to the point. And I still feel like even when I write about baseball, I write it the way the boxing writers, when I was young, used to write, which was, guys like Ron Borges and Michael Katz and Norm Frondheim and George Kimball and Steve Springer at the Times. They went right at things, but like now, that traditional media doesn't cover these things anymore. It's turned more into, right, a lot of like videographers and stuff. And, some of them do a great job. I think Ali Sekbak does a great job. Marcos Villegas does a great job. But, they're still kind of beholden to these entities for access, right? So no one criticizes anything. And if you listen to the messaging that's coming out of like whatever stories that are written, they echo the promoter like way too much, and you can't listen to like a promoter, right? I mean, when you're writing a Justin Herbert story and say he plays well, do you go to his agent and ask him, how do you, right? I mean, this is like, I've always said, like, never quote a boxing promoter unless he's telling you like a fact, right? Like they are fighting on Tuesday, then go ahead and quote him. But otherwise, never quote but last fight it's going to probably do, I think, between, some of the estimates that I heard, right, on the optimistic end, it was maybe in the 700-800 range, and the low end, maybe 400,000 or 500,000. But this isn't close to being like a million pay-per-view buy thing, right? Because, to get to like a million, it has to transcend. And I can't tell you the number of times where the Dodgers were playing a game as a fight was going on, and they had the pay-per-view in the clubhouse, which is why when the Dodgers were hitting, you would never see anybody on the bench because they were all inside watching the fight, right? Because it still had that. And now people just don't know about this, like Bill Dwyer, the longtime editor of the LA Times sports section, he was a huge boxing advocate, right? You could argue he helped kind of create De La Hoya in terms of, giving them as much ink in the paper that he did. And even, right, he later became a columnist, and even then, like, right, he would, he went to go cover all the fights. A big boxing fan. I had lunch with him last week, and he asked me, what do you got going on next? And I said, I got a fight on, I'm going to the fight on Saturday. And he's like, who's fighting? So here's a guy who like likes the sport, and it's kind of fallen off his radar, and so the whole thing is really just kind of weird right now. I was telling somebody too, and the thing is, right, I do feel that a lot of people that know what they're watching have kind of stopped watching it already because they kind of see it for what it is. And so the people that are still like into this stuff right now, they're kind of buying into the whole mythology of it all, which is great. I'm not like telling anybody not to enjoy anything, but it's weird for me to go there now and write about this thing, because the way I wrote, I was describing this to somebody is like, okay, well, let's just say you have an audience that's like religious, right? I'm going into like a Catholic church, but I write about Jesus, like historical Jesus, rather than, religious Jesus, right? Those are two kind of separate things. And that's kind of what I feel like I'm doing right now, because there's this there's this thing about, oh, he's, the undisputed. It's like, who cares? Like the belts are meaningless, right? Like, but they're trying to create this thing out of like nothing almost, But what you see too, though, is like as soon as these guys retire and there's some distance in time, things kind of sober up, right? Because Joe Calzaghe to me was like a guy that I always kind of thought like, what am I missing here? But his backers at HBO, the Max Kellermans are yelling, "Oh, he's an all-time great," blah blah blah. And sure, at that moment, I think a lot of the fans kind of got swept up in that excitement. But what's happened now? Does anybody think of Joe Calzaghe as an all-time great? Like, of course not, right? Because as soon as we had some distance, we kind of see it for what it is. And I'm guessing that, like with Canelo, we're gonna have a little something like that, right? Because the one thing about boxing is that more than in any other sport, probably, you're defined by your opposition, right? Your opponent, your best opponent, defines who you are, right? Ray Leonard, he eventually went up all the way to 175 and won a title up there, right? That's not what we think about. That's not why we think Ray Leonard's great, is because he won a title at the end of his career at 175 or even won at 168, right? He was great because he fought Tommy Hearns and he fought Roberto Duran and he fought Marvin Hagler, And I think that's how you kind of wind up taking inventory. And, if you take, right, you look at De La Hoya, right? I mean, for better or worse, the truth is that Trinidad fight defined both him and Tito. We went into that fight, I think, hoping that whoever wins this, was going to kind of elevate themselves into that Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns strata. And it turned out, right, one guy didn't want to be there. The other guy couldn't get rid of him. And they probably both weren't as good as what we thought they were. And that's their legacy now, And I think when you look at Canelo, we're going to wind up looking back at those 2 Triple G fights, right? Which is he fought, really good fights, very, right, solid fighter, courageous fighter. He stood in there against his killer, kind of same with Triple G. They kind of went at it. One guy might have been slightly better than the other, but they were kind of more or less the same level. And that's kind of how I think we're gonna wind up remembering these guys.
Dylan, I got one last one for you. I may fire you up a little bit with this question, but I have to ask it. Breaking news on Compas on the Beat. Former NFL running back Frank Gore will be making his debut in boxing against former NBA point guard Darren Williams. You and right now you just broke down what's wrong with boxing, but I gotta ask you, what do you think about this matchup?
I don't even know. I mean, I've never seen either guy even throw a punch, right? I mean, the one thing I will say, and when you look at the heavyweights now, right? I mean, the fact that they're trying to sell Tyson Fury as like, look how gracefully he moves for a guy 6'8". It's like, dude, I've seen Kevin Durant play basketball, like you're not gonna trick me there, right? Like,
and my bad, they're gonna be on the Jake Paul Tommy Fury undercard.
Yeah, well, and this is again, I think this does speak to, I think, a larger problem that boxing has right now, right? Which is they can't sell personality. And the one thing, and I don't even know what's happened, because a lot of these, and like, don't get me wrong, these are like really nice. A lot of these fighters are really nice kids, but they kind of don't have that. Like, that was the one thing about boxing, right? Was that every now and then, right, some crazy guy would come up and he'd be hilarious and you'd be kind of drawn to him for some reason. And even Canelo for that part, like, I mean, I think, Canelo's personality, I guess now, I mean, it was kind of more proven over time, right? You kind of see he's the kind of a consummate pro. He's a serious guy. We've kind of gotten to know him by observing him over like a very long period of time. But even like when he came up, it wasn't like he had this like magnetic personality or anything. And that's where boxing has left this like wide hole, right? For like clown stuff like that to happen. Because this is the thing is like, Jake Paul better than any, because, there's a lot of, when you watch people fight, it's kind of about the connection, or even if it's like football, say, right? Like you become a Justin Herbert fan and right. And the stories that you guys put out about him, right? And people read that and I like this guy. I want to, right? I'm invested, right? I can see part of myself in this guy. Yeah. So, right. People get invested in the personality and then it's kind of like, I see myself in this guy. I want to cheer for this guy. There are no real like personalities right now in boxing, and, even Canelo, we've, again, he's kind of been like when he was coming up, it wasn't the personality that he needed an entire hype machine to kind of bring him up, and that's where I think, unfortunately, that these guys have been able to just kind of take advantage of this, right? Because the truth is, if you saw two dudes fighting in a parking lot, you would stand there and watch, right? It's interesting watching people fight. And, there isn't, in terms of like quality, let's be honest, like it doesn't, we've all enjoyed, right? We've seen great high school football games or high school soccer games or whatever, right? Doesn't have to be NFL to necessarily be enjoyable, right? And I'm guessing a lot of the people that tune into stuff like that, they're not like fight fans anyway, And so, the boxing people will kind of defend this by saying, well, those are two different audiences. Now, my counter to that would be, well, that Jake Paul fan, 35 years ago, he might have been a Ray Leonard fan, right? Because Ray Leonard kind of had that personality and you would get invested in Ray Leonard. And that's why there were more boxing fans back then than there are right now. As far as that matchup, man, that's a tough one, right? Are they the same weight?
I don't know. I don't even know how they're going to do it because I think Frank Gore's about 230, 240.
Right.
And Darren Williams couldn't have been more than $190 when he played. So I don't know how they're going to do this, but I think the fight's in December 18th in Tampa.
So I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'm kind of like, it was interesting when like Nate Robinson just got flattened, right? Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I didn't buy it.
Chad Ochocinco was in. I mean, Chad Johnson he had an interesting one too. So it's not. It's pretty interesting when these guys get in and do another sport.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, that said, I saw Jake Paul was talking about, like, in all seriousness, and I don't know where this was. I just saw this on TikTok somewhere, but like he was talking about, like, in all seriousness, that he should fight Canelo. Saying, well, I'm the much bigger guy. Here's the thing, man. Somebody at some point is going to get hurt doing this. This isn't like a joke, right?
He's come out and said that he wants to fight Conor too. And I'm kind of like, dude, Conor might serve you up. Like, I wouldn't be asking for Canelo, or Canelo would knock him out in a round. And maybe Canelo would be like Floyd Mayweather and let him hang around for a little bit and then just go for the big knockout. But I just don't think.
Reminds me of this column idea I had, 5-6 years ago when Roman Gonzalez was the number one pound for pound guy. Dude weighed like 100 pounds, right? I actually reached out to his people saying, can I fight him? Because he was fighting at the Forum, in Inglewood. So leading up to that, it's like, well, let me show up to like his training one day and let me fight him, right? And I thought we could take video, because I weigh like more than So I wanted to fight him, and his people didn't, they thought he might kill me.
Dylan,
I'm guessing he would have hit me once in the body, right? And it would have
that would have been it.
Yeah, so it didn't happen.
Yeah. No, what a shame. Honestly, you probably wouldn't have been able to hang out with us in DC or Bold God if that would have happened. So we're glad that it didn't happen. But Dylan, thank you so much for jumping on with us. When are we going to see you? When are you going to appear at a Chargers game next?
I hope soon, man. I actually volunteered to do Saturday, but you guys are getting Helene Elliott over there instead. So yeah.
All right. Well, check out his work. LA Times, Dylan Hernandez. Like we said, he's a compa. He's a friend of the show. Thank you so much, Dylan.
No, thank you.